Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Art of Photography. My name is Ted Forbes, and in this video today I want to talk about a British photographer by the name of Thurston Hopkins. Now, chances are you probably are not familiar with Thurston Hopkins. For whatever reason, he has remained a lot more obscure than some of his contemporaries in the heart of his career, and I think that's extremely unfortunate. I think he was simply an amazing photographer, and in some ways, maybe because there's an obvious comparison to Henri Cartier-Bresson in terms of subject matter, the time he shot, the similar training and backgrounds, and also a passion for painting. And so, there's going to be kind of an obvious comparison to Bresson, but for whatever reason, Bresson achieved a level of fame and notoriety that makes him, at least with photographers, fairly household name, and Thurston Hopkins is not. Anyway, I want to cover his work today because I think he's really important, I think he's worth diving into, and I think he's somebody you should know, whether you've heard of him or not. So, Thurston Hopkins was born in 1913 and actually began his career. He's 5 years younger than Bresson, who was born in '08. And he began his career in a very similar way. He was trained as an artist and as a painter. And he began his career as what we know today as being a graphic designer. Now, in the 30s, they were not known as graphic designers. The term was either graphic illustrator or graphic artist. But he began his career doing that, and actually has gone on record as saying he switched to photography because it paid better than the brush, in his words. And it's really interesting because I think coming from that background, and I'm sorry to be making the comparison, but much like Bresson, I think you're going to see in his photographs a real traditionally rooted classical sense of composition that's very refined, that I think comes from having that painting background. And the kinds of work that he does is composed and illustrated through photos in a way that would make sense. Amazing photographer, and has had a brilliant career. Started out and became a war photographer during World War II. And after that, retired from war photography and actually worked for an enormous amount of publications, including a couple very well-known publications in Britain. And after that, he retired, became a teacher. He's still alive today. I have no idea where he is or what he's doing. He's a gentleman I would love to meet. Anyway, I think the best thing to do right now is to move over and look at some images. Now, you're going to notice that a lot of these images are what are commonly referred to today as street photography. I really hate that term, and I'm sorry, for a number of reasons, because street photography sounds so plebeian and so casual and so, anybody can just go snap shots on the street. And I think a better term for it is social documentary, and I think you're going to see this in a second. So anyway, without further ado, let's go over and check out some of the work of Thurston Hopkins. Okay, so we're going to look at some of the work by Thurston Hopkins, and if you're new to the show, I use Pinterest for this kind of thing for a number of reasons. One, it makes presenting these images to you very easy, and also I love Pinterest because it's a way of bookmarking your images. And so also you can go here after you watch the show if you want to go bookmark these for yourself, or you want to go see the sources they came from, or just kind of check them out in general. You're welcome to do that. My Pinterest account is pinterest.com/TedForbes, pinterest.com/TedForbes, and I have a whole board on there on my boards for Thurston Hopkins, and boards from other shows are there as well. Anyway, without further ado, we're going to look at some work here. This is one of the first images, one of the earlier images that I came across. One of Thurston Hopkins' first assignments as a photojournalist when he went on his own was this story. It was kind of well known about the homeless population of cats in London. And being a cat guy myself, obviously I love these images. They're very cute. They're interesting. They're pretty early, but surprisingly enough, his most famous image, I think if you consider any of them well known, came of Poodles, and this one is titled La Dolce Vita, and this actually, there's a lot of decisive moment we're going to talk about with Thurston Hopkins. This actually was posed and framed, but it is a hilarious shot. It's cute. You've seen this on posters and countless times, and this became more or less his calling card. It was a little later. And anyway, wonderful image, the obvious composition and the metaphor of society within this well-coiffed poodle, which is, I think, extremely hilarious. And anyway, a very cute shot. Anyway, what I want to talk about with Hopkins' work, and I think you see it in this shot, which does feature another poodle, but a fine sense of composition, first of all. You're starting to see kind of these triangular shapes, ways of leading the eye around the composition, much like you see with Cartier-Bresson. And so I think there's an obvious comparison to Bresson that is drawn from a lot of his images. That was the style of the day that was being shot. However, I don't think he copies Bresson, and I think that's what frustrates me a little bit about the obscurity of Thurston Hopkins, is I really think he is on that level. And I think there is a sophistication and a maturity with the compositions that he's provided providing. In this image, you have the couple dragging the poodle. There's another couple in the background that's a little bit arbitrary, but this is a very decisive moment, obviously. But you also have a very wonderful sense of, this timelessness and a little bit of style, probably taken in the 50s here. The woman with her Sunday dress and gloves and pillbox hat, the poodle on the leash, and the gentleman with his suit and pipe. And it's almost got, I think you could make some comparisons to maybe painters of the era, particularly American painters such as Edward Hopper, where, there's just this particular character going on of style that's really played up and quite beautiful. And I think it's remarkable. I think, having that sense of maturity and that sense of composition, I think is really wonderful. You see everything from that to a lot of the more photojournalistic stuff that he did. This was on an article about Jamaican immigrants in London. And again, the style, the clothes these guys are wearing. This is going to be more on the decisive moment end of things. That was actually a proper street photo that was taken to fit a story at the time, which was some of the immigration issues of the era that were going on in London. And, everything from that to like some of these school pictures that were probably taken on some kind of medium format camera, Rolleiflex or something like that. This is a Scottish schoolboy working on homework. Again, the composition's there, but you mix that with that decisive moment aspect of it, and you really end up with some very beautiful things. These are some other school kids that are shot, wonderful facial expressions, the sense of concentration you get in the girl with her thumb in her mouth and just looking up for a split second is maybe the teacher saying something or she's taking notice of the photographer at the last minute. But anyway, really wonderful. He was also well known for shooting children, and I think he had some wonderful shots. This one on this river with this wonderful sense of depth, and this kid with a fishing pole doing a little fishing, and just a real sense of beauty. Again, when you look at these, angular shapes, 45-degree angles, triangles, whatever you want to call that, and we've seen this thread with a lot of photographers, the obvious sense of geometry that goes on in these things. And I love this guy, this guy with the foxhounds. And first of all, the hat and even the whip are just classic with this, the boots and the coat. And then the way the dogs are stacked up behind these bars, it's just simply wonderful. Again, the obvious comparison with somebody like Bresson, and I think in this image, not so much the composition, but definitely more of the timeliness of the era, if you will. And, these are really neat too. There's a lot of women in big dresses, and I think that was a favorite subject of his too. This is the Sleeping Beauties photograph of these three women. Obviously, one in the middle is probably a bride, and the two bridesmaids, exhausted and asleep on the bed. But the way that the dress and this kind of plumed nature of the whole thing fits in with the composition, and you're going to see that echoed in his work. This is another one of his more well-known shots. Getty owns a lot of these now. And this is one of a woman, crouched over, smoking a cigarette and looking at her reflection in the mirror, and just really neat. And, I think a lot of his work evokes the kind of the street photography aspect of it, but then you have these other shots that are kind of composed, but have a lot of that same style of the era in them, and I think it's beautiful. To compare that with some of the street shots, this is probably one of his most well-known photographs, which is a wonderful shot of these kids playing, I assume, cowboys and Indians, and you have this kid popping out of a street hole in the bottom with a gun. And, timelessness, evoking, violence, the juxtaposition. I mean, this is a common thread you see with a lot of photographers where you see war mixed with children, which, is a very common subject, but I think he's done it in a very interesting way, and the reason the shot is very well known. This was another one that was more serious, but a girl in poverty sleeping under newspapers in a filthy blanket. Very poignant, brings the eye in. The composition is there. He's doing more than just aiming a camera, but really capturing something that is very evocative of the world around him as it happened. Juxtapose that with this shot of this couple making out on a couch. Again, really the focal point here. There's two of them for me. I think one is the dress of this woman as she's crouched over and kissing the gentleman, but also the other individual that's peeking around here, almost offended by the whole scene, which I just think is kind of a little bit humor, pokes a little fun at it as well. I think this shot is simply brilliant, and this is one of the first ones I bookmarked in here. And this is, how can you go wrong with umbrellas? If you go ask Saul Leader, he'll tell you. But in black and white, and you have the checkerboard of the building behind it, and it really sets off a wonderful contrast to what you're seeing with the umbrella, not only in terms of light and dark, but also in terms of just the grid that's at an angle, and this whimsical umbrella that's tilted 45 degrees that, balances that in contrast contrasts it really nicely. And you have the gentleman here in this cloak talking presumably to the woman in the window up here. Absolutely beautiful photo. Some other great stuff. These two women dancing. I think this is just beautiful. It's kind of a street shot of two women doing a tango. Another shot that I find really interesting is this one. And there are actually two versions of this that I found. And this is a woman smoking a cigarette, classic street photo, decisive moment. She's got the beret on, very stylish. And you start to see, as you do with work of people like Saul Leader and some of those guys, a level of abstraction that comes in the form of reflections in glass, and that becomes part of the composition. He didn't frame it up at her back here. He let this breathe, and you see a little bit of pattern reflection from the street sign, and then also you start to see the layer of abstraction because you have the opacity and the translucency of the glass. This sounds really fancy. It's nothing, but I just think it's a wonderful shot, the woman smoking. There's a second version of this that was taken cropped in, stood a little closer, a little bit tighter. You can tell it's a different shot, and if you look at her eyes, she's looking down here. I thought it was actually a crop of the same shot when I first saw it, but it's a really interesting second take of the scene. In this one, that abstraction level is cropped out. And, I don't know what the preference was here. I don't know what the usage was on these offhand. Presumably they were journalistic shots, so they were for some kind of publication like a newspaper or a magazine. But I think this is interesting because you have two completely different feels in the same setting, in the same position. And I find it really interesting when you find work by photographers where you're able to see this exploration a little bit, because I think there's a lot to learn there. A lot of times we're presented with, the final image, this quintessential image, and we don't know the outtakes of that. We don't see what went into it, and it's real easy to start seeing this mystical layer of, what we perceive to be this decisive moment. And I think that's why that term gets a lot of that kind of coverage. But it's interesting when you're able to see kind of an A/B comparison between two of them. I think it's just brilliant. Another one that I find just amazing, I think it was from the same set as the Jamaican Immigrants, and this is a Jamaican immigrant worker on the right. I may be getting a little of this wrong because I'm not sure about the history on these. It was really hard to research this, actually. But just a wonderful, decisive moment of these two guys on their smoke break, and kind of this bond between them of the offering of the light for the cigarette. And anyway, just a really neat shot, really interesting. And I think we're back to the Poodle shot now. So anyway, a wide breadth of stuff. I think that you see a lot of versatility in what Thurston Hopkins did. And I think that versatility in that range comes between, posed versus decisive moment. We see this one as being posed, whereas, you see for instance, the kid being more of a decisive moment kind of thing. It's a really nice contrast to those. And then I also think you see, really kind of a wonderful range of rough composition versus style versus, signs of the times. Like, I think one of my favorite shots is still this, kind of Hopper-esque thing of the couple with the dog. And he just did that so well. And again, it just kind of blows my mind that he's not more of a household name than he is. And that could be a number of things. I don't know. It could be just, representation as far as agency and stuff like that. Whereas maybe Cartier-Bresson, those guys just, had better PR. I don't know. But his work certainly is deserving. I think Thurston is one of the deserving many, and I'm honored to cover him on this show. And anyway, just amazing stuff, and I hope this has been inspirational to you on some level. So I'm not really sure why Hopkins has kind of remained more of an obscure name, particularly when you compare him with some of the contemporaries that he shot with during the bulk of his career. Guys like Bresson, guys like Kappa. And, I think you probably could make the argument that, those guys may have been a little better at the publicity thing, maybe had better representation, maybe did more gallery work. But for some reason, those guys tend to be household names when it comes to talking about street photography. And Thurston Hopkins remains a little bit more obscure. But anyway, what I hope that I've gotten across today is that, here's a brilliant photographer that has gone a little bit overlooked. And I hope that maybe this sparks a little bit of interest, and it's something that people start talking about and looking more into his work and his photographs, because he left an enormous contribution to the oeuvre of the history of photography, even though it probably is lesser known than some of the other things that you consider from that time period. And, like I said, he's still alive today, and I think he would be fascinating to have a conversation with. He just left an enormous amount of work during his career, which, is something to be very proud of. That, I have no explanation as to why this is not better known. So anyway, once again, guys, this has been The Art of Photography, and thanks for watching. I will see you guys next time. Later.